So it's the half moon Wan Pra here at Bayagiri. I can't even remember how many weeks we're now into sheltering in place. It's kind of losing track of the time. Just a few noteworthy news items to start with. That Max just got word that his flight was canceled tomorrow, so he's not leaving again. Not sure if it's a sign from the cosmos or just just bad luck, but
General dysfunction.
just general dysfunction, right? So he's here, not sure what he's going to do. Been on our retreat crew for the past number of months. So his loss is our gain for another day at least. So that's a newsworthy item. And a couple of days ago in the mail, I got my Medicare card. I guess it's kind of apropos of nothing, but I guess I could give some reflections on old age, sickness and death, but but I've done that a lot of times before, so people would just accuse me of getting old and repeating myself. Which is probably going to happen anyway. Ajahn and myself, and Ajahn, did you define it? No, I guess you weren't there this morning for our Terrace Cafe. Anyway, we had a meeting over the phone with several of the elders in our North American sanghas. And we do it, well, we usually do it once a month, but we've been doing it more often the past month or so, just as we've been emerging from our winter retreats, comparing notes about where we're all at with the virus. Continues to be, the major topic of focus, and the news articles and signs from outside the monastery are starting to hint at relaxing some of the rules and laws about the sheltering in place and all that stuff. Maybe in a few weeks to start considering that they're still expecting rise, of course, in the numbers, but hopefully optimistically thinking that it's starting to flatten and to peak in many areas. So who knows what will happen, but kind of getting our minds around some of those kinds of things. Talking about it as a group with the North American elders. One of the topics that came up was the whole economic outlook, which by many indicators anyway doesn't look so good, and that it might be looking at some challenging times for the world economy, and the fact that, of course, as monasteries are part of the world and affected by everything in the world, wondering how the monasteries will be faring over the next short term and long term probably, and kind of what to do, if anything, at that point. And a couple of the monasteries were reporting that plans that have been emerging over past 2 years in terms of further development, building some structures, a little bit of construction, with some savings that's been accrued, because as most people know, we don't borrow money, for the most part anyway, try not to. Most of the monasteries pretty much just build structures, new things like that, only when there are sufficient funds to do so without having to borrow. So it involves the lay support groups who sponsor the monastery to set aside funds on a regular basis until there's enough to do a building or a part of a building. So a few of the monasteries were considering starting to do some this coming season after our winter retreat ended a few weeks ago. And the question was coming up amongst pretty much everybody. It's sort of, well, do we, in anticipation of a downturn, do we put everything on hold, don't do any of that, save the money just in case, ... Or do we go ahead and do some of the projects, but be prudent, etc. And one of the monks, Ajahn Sona, remembered a quote, and I hope I don't misquote the quote. I think he said it was maybe an Islamic proverb. Again, I hope that's correct. But the question being, should we hold on to resources in anticipation of tight times to come, or continue, say, to support the local economy in the recovery and contribute some funds to people to help get them going and build some structures that might be needed. Again, being prudent and not spending at all, kind of a thing. But the quote that he came up with, that he remembered, was something along the lines of, where would be the best place to store my rice? And the answer to the question is, the best place to store your rice is in your neighbor's belly, which I thought was very lovely, because it points to that ethic of looking after each other, looking out for each other, not hoarding just for oneself, but looking around us and seeing if there's a need that we can help with, or a way to not just hunker down, circle the wagons, defend ourselves, keep our turf to ourselves, but to look out around us and to store our rice in our neighbor's belly if that's where it's needed. So I think people were moved by that, and I think that was part of the sentiment that was being discussed anyway. And as time moves on, as we emerge, or I think we will emerge from what's going on to some extent anyway. Lumpha and Ajahn were kind of talking along similar themes in their past talks about all the goodness that's come from this event, this worldwide event, and just to really keep that in mind and to notice and focus and attend to the ways that we've benefited in some ways from this. There's unquestionably a lot of suffering that's been going on, not only with the loss of lives, but also the impending economic issues. And there's also been some good things that have come in terms of reassessing human values. What are our priorities? So the question, the talk is getting back to normal, and read an essay that was passed on to me a little bit ago, not too long ago, kind of addressing that issue and pretty much posing a very important question: is do we really want to come back to quote-unquote normal? The author was referring to this period of time as the great pause, and suggesting that in the weeks and months to come as things open up, that there's going to be a lot of messages being sent out to us to reassure us, to say, okay, now it's time to get back to life as usual, to get back to your old routines, essentially start producing and consuming again. And I've heard from people, talking to friends, that they're lamenting, I just wish things would get back to the way they were. I wish things would get back to normal. And to be wary of that, this author was suggesting, just to be wary of that. And ask ourselves, do we really want to return to that kind of normal? The kind of normal that is just lost in the world around us, lost in what's available to stimulate us, to distract us, to keep us entertained, to keep us occupied, moment after moment, hour after hour, day after day, through our lives. Is that really what we want to do? So this is the perfect opportunity during this pause to really assess that for ourselves and to re-enter activity once it is allowed, to re-enter it with a level of awareness and consciousness. I couldn't help but keep remembering a song from the days before I was a monk. I think it was back in the 80s. I used to listen to some music, not huge amounts, but I did happen to be a fan of Talking Heads, David Byrne. Some of you may know who they are. Many probably don't. It's been a generational thing, but there was one song, I don't remember all of the lines and everything, but I think the name of the song was Once in a Lifetime, and it was part of it anyway. Part of the words are something like you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile. You may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. And you may ask yourself, how did I get here? And then there was a refrain throughout the whole song. It's like, same as it ever was, same as it ever was, same as it ever was. And it's just sort of a song about how easy it is, or reflection of how easy it is to get lost in that world of complacency, illusion, materialism in some ways, looking for that sense of contentment and fulfillment in mundane aspects of the world. And asking ourselves, do we really want this? How did I get here anyway? So just to pose that as a question for ourselves. How did I get here? And to reevaluate where we are looking to take refuge, and to ask, is it in getting back to normal? Is that what we really want to do? Is that where we're going to find our place of security, of stability? And this was the Buddha's question for himself in his spiritual explorations, and realizing for himself, asking himself the questions of why am I taking refuge? Why am I looking for stability in that which is inherently unstable, in that which is unsatisfactory in the long run, and that which is not really under my control? Why do I take refuge there? Why don't I look for something that's rather than a short-term sense of stability, of security? Why don't I look for something that's longer lasting, longer going to be more fulfilling in the long term? And that was his reflection to motivate himself to begin his 6-year spiritual search before he realized awakening. He essentially was asking himself that question: how did I get here? And then, as most of you know probably, on the night of his awakening, the story goes, there were the 3 watches of the night on that night of his awakening. The first watch of the night, he was surveying. He had developed, of course, over these 6 years, he had developed various strong meditation capacities and was able to see into his past lives, and was reviewing countless past lives that he had lived, and discovering the fact that really he couldn't even get back to any beginning. There was no discernible beginning of the number of lives, his existence in samsara, the round of rebirth, being born in many different forms, in many different situations, and always just arising, living a life, passing away, arising, living a life, passing away, arising, living a life, passing away, over and over and over, for an incalculable number of eons. And then the second watch of the night, seeing other beings doing the same thing, seeing the arising and passing of other beings according to their karma, again within this vast round of samsara, without a discernible beginning. And it was, at least as I understand or interpret the teaching, that was his very, very strong emotional response to the vastness of samsara and the endlessness of it, and the fact that it would continue on like that if he wasn't able to see how to break away from it, and break out of that endless production of existence. Which is, of course, what happened in the third watch of the night, as he penetrated very deeply the Four Noble Truths, saw the cause of this endless cycling, the cause of unabated craving, driving one on through the realms of existence over and over and over again, and how to abandon that very craving as a release from the cycle of existence. But it took his honest appraisal of the situation at hand, and for him to be able to make that leap, despite all of the meditative attainments he had realized. It wasn't until he fully penetrated the Four Noble Truths, the existence and cause of suffering and the way leading to the end of it. It was until he saw for himself and had that emotional push, that in complete disenchantment with what is on offer for us in the realm of samsara, to be able to push beyond it. So these kinds of moments are ways that we can reflect on that and reflect on the quality of the endlessness of what we can get ourselves involved with and absorbed into when things are going well, at least on a material level. And to use this great pause to really reflect and consider what song track we want to play when we hit the play button again. So I'm reminded of a talk that Bhikkhu Bodhi gave quite a few years ago, and there was a transcript of it that I read. It was a talk that was given at a Western Buddhist monastic conference, one of the early ones. I wasn't at it, but I read the transcript from this particular talk, where he was talking about as Buddhism comes to the West, how it's being incorporated and presented in combination with several other Western philosophies. And his concern at that time was that there were a couple of things, anyway, that were noted in this particular talk, a couple of things that were missing from the Western adaptations as they were seen in the most part. Of course, not to make too many generalizations, there are exceptions, but overall, that Western quote-unquote Buddhism was missing aspects of the teaching related to renunciation and related to actual transcendence, the goal, nibbana, and being presented as more of a general path to increased well-being, particularly psychological well-being, and missing some of the more traditional teachings as it's adapted to American culture. So those came to mind also for me. And just to note that if we're looking to maybe not create the same patterns as we emerge from this time, if we don't want to go back to that normal, one of the things to consider is how to simplify our lives and how to look at renunciation or simplification as a true benefit for us, not as something that restricts us. You know, we come from a time of unbridled consumption and stimulation, rapidity of stimulation, availability of all the various ways of receiving information and the pace of our lives. And that considering simplifying, slowing down, pausing more, not picking up the same patterns, might actually be more enjoyable. Just to take a walk in the woods. You know, we're so lucky here, and we've got this beautiful forest that's just by its very nature peaceful, calming, settling. And to take advantage of those opportunities, and even if you live in a city, there are times when you can find your way to a park or to something with a bit more of a natural setting, to take a slow walk, you know, without your headphones, without your earphones, without your MP3 player, and to walk and keep the senses open. Stand, look around, listen. Slow down. Breathe. And to really just question the pace, the lifestyle that we've been living. Do we really want to do that? Do we really want to get back to that normal? And I would just suggest that there is an alternative that might be more desirable, and that not only could it have serious impact for the good in our own individual lives, but also in the world around us, the relationships we have with other people. Not seeing other people just as objects to help get what it is that we want to get, or means to ends, but just to look and see other people as living human beings with the same aspirations, foibles that we have, and to relate to each other in that way. To give to each other, to keep our neighbors' bellies full. And also to look at the environment around us and the way we're affecting the greater environment. I think it was mentioned recently in one of the talks that people in India, many people for the first time in several generations, were actually able to see the Himalaya mountains, with the reduction of all the fumes from air pollution and other natural occurrences, waking up of some of the wildlife, and temporary, probably, reduction of some of the harmful things that we're putting into the atmosphere, and the dramatic effects that it is having and will be having. Maybe we don't have to return to that normal. We will be engaging in doing some of that, but to question how much do we really need to do? What can we scale back on? How will that improve our lives individually and as a world society? So simplification, renunciation, could be a good thing, can be an enjoyable thing. Gives us a chance to breathe and be clear in our hearts, and look at what's going to give us that long-term sense of satisfaction. Maybe even do a little more meditation. The other aspect in that essay, in that talk from Bhikkhu Bodhi, was about transcendence. Transcendence of samsara, essentially, and the realization of where the path that the Buddha taught can actually take us, not just to a more skillful way of life in the world, but also taken to its ultimate transcendence of samsara altogether, the ending of the cycles of endless suffering that we can find ourselves caught in, or that we are caught in. And for most of us, that's a very long-term, that's the ultimate long-term path, setting our sights and on that as an aspiration, but not, of course, getting lost in that, such that we develop a sense of anxiety or fear or hopelessness because it's a fairly tall order, but to act as a point of inspiration of what's possible, to keep us just putting in the developing the path factors that lead in that direction, and realizing that that endeavor, even if it doesn't result in the final goal this lifetime, is still enjoyable, pleasurable, and little by little gives us a greater sense of peace, drop by drop. And that just getting over the hurdle of readjusting and reestablishing, and starting that process of simplification and toning down, settling down our way of life is in following precepts that lead to that non-harming and simplification, non-harming of ourselves, other beings, and the world around us. All of that is something that leads to greater peace of mind along the way. To really adopting that wholeheartedly. And, with proper effort, right effort, consistent effort, even the least confident or the least skilled of us in meditation will start to see some benefit, will start to see some results over a period of time, maybe in small bits that sometimes seem hard to understand or to realize, but it's happening on sometimes a fairly imperceptible level, a level of peace of mind that comes from scaling back, sitting quietly, just listening. So that goal is realizable. It can be done. And our teachers various excellent examples in the teachers around us, so we're very fortunate. So to look to those examples as inspiration as well. So to keep both those factors in mind, that the importance of renunciation, simplicity, really readjusting how we focus in the world, how we live our lives, and also the possibility that it can lead to a total kind of freedom. And just kind of a final thought as we kind of emerge again, if that emergence should be happening in the next few weeks or months, to be really careful how and where we put our attention, and we have access to such wonderful bits of information these days, and we have access to horrible things to put into our minds to feed ourselves. So we have to be really circumspect about what we feed on in the informational world around us, and particularly like the news can really be very useful and beneficial to keep us informed, to help guide us into making our choices of how we're re-entering the world, and we need to keep up on things to a certain extent. But also to be really wary of the power of news as entertainment. So using news for information as needed, but not moving into the compelling entertainment aspects of it. And most of it is quote-unquote entertainment in a very negative way that seems to be oriented towards exciting anxiety, confusion, fear, anger, resentment, irritation, annoyance, all of those kinds of things. It's fairly easily accessible. And to see that if we're getting pulled in that way, to pull back. We don't have to engage in it in that way. To use it as best we can for just being informed and making proper decisions, but not getting wrapped up in the complex emotions that it can lead to. So to be careful, use care. So yeah, just making sure that after the great pause, and we listen to a soundtrack that's going to take us into a direction that will lead to more fulfillment on a long-term basis. Maybe not having to re-engage in the same ways, not to go back to normal, quote unquote. Make a new normal. It's a lot less complicated. So we don't have to keep living the same as it ever was. So I'll leave that for this evening's reflection.
Andamayan Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dadama Se Sadhu